Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do wish there was more simplifying like that, but I just don't think that that's the way they're going to go. They're always going to have these big complex stories now.
Oh, now, words, Luca didn't build a time machine. She built a portal device, and it set off with the pendant.
Which turned out to be a
Lane's
time machine.
pendant.
It's like,
No, the pendant is what turned it into a dimensional rift time machine. No, the epoch is the time machine. That was built by one of the three sages. Oh, God.
there are many people who consider this the greatest JRPG of all time, and in many respects, one of the greatest games of all time. And I am going to assume neither of you would dispute this as being deservedly up there as one of the best Japanese RPGs. Jay?
Oh, no, I definitely not dispute it. I would never call it the best. It's not I mean, it doesn't crack my personal top 5, but I have what I consider a great game and what I like are two different things, I guess you could say. Chrono Trigger is a fantastic game, absolutely deserves every bit of praise. I wouldn't say, I wouldn't crack my top 5 of all time, but it would probably make my top 10.
Cal?
I think it's difficult. I mean, it's my favorite RPG of all time. That's
There we go.
CRPG, JRPG, every genre of RPG. Chrono Trigger is going to be my number one. But I also grew up with it. I had it the day it came out. I played it 30 times while I was still a kid. So there's a lot of nostalgia value there too. And it's really hard, in my opinion, it's really hard to play a game that's that old and compare it to the narratives of a current game. They didn't have the ability to put everything in it that they can now. You can't have Mass Effect and everything that happened on Mass Effect 1 or 2 on a cartridge. You couldn't do it. And the reason why I say that that's such a big deal is, I know, Jay, you haven't played Suikoden, as you said. I think that is a perfect example of a game that if Konami had not dropped the ball and let the series die out, if there was a modern game that exemplifies Eiyuden Chronicles, what Suikoden is, it would be wildly successful because the narrative told throughout S1 and S2 was very limited by the medium in which it was put on. I mean, 108 characters already took up a shit ton of memory on the cartridges and the disc. Well, that was PS1 at that point, but they just didn't have space. And you can play S1 and then play each game in the series and see that as the medium grew, the amount of detail in the narrative, the amount of detail in the characters grew. So Chrono Trigger, my favorite game of all time, if you go back and play it now, and I played it last year on stream, it's very limited because, I mean, they can only do so much with the characters. You can only have so much dialogue on the cart.
But I find myself more invested in these characters than I do in like you say, it's limited, and I still think like this is a translation that was actually good, which even back in the early 90s especially, sure, was a freaking miracle for most JRPGs. Don't go back to Legend of Dragoon if you want a well-written story. It's got great ideas, but holy shit, the translation in that game is so bad. It's rough. But I still find myself loving everything these characters say at like every point in the story. I feel invested in them. I feel like they grow. I feel hardship for Robo. I feel sympathy for Frog. And sadness for that major event that happens halfway throughout the story. And they managed to do all that with less power than the PS1. And
but that goes to the strength of writing more than anything else at that point.
Ted Woosley, cheers to him, did an amazing job in that regard and made that dialogue work.
It's the only game I can think of that time travel actually worked well in. And it wasn't nonsensical. I struggle to think of another time travel based game that makes sense. And Chrono Trigger is simple enough. But see, that's another thing. If you did something like it now, it's not going to be simple. It's going to be complex and convoluted because games have become much more complex than they used to be. That's why it worked, was that there's only these limited number of ages. It's still the same map, just moved around slightly as the world changed, but you're essentially going back over the same areas over and over again. It's brilliantly done. I mean, they were there was a reason why they were the visionaries in the dream team. They were extremely intelligent about how to push every bit. Talk about the sound, like sound design in Chrono Trigger. Some of that music today still stands up, and that was on a Super Nintendo.
Best soundtrack in any video game ever? Yes?
Ooh.
No? It's definitely up there. Jesus.
It's up there, but I don't know if
it's
I'd
up
say
there.
it's best.
You turn that game on, and it's like, oh, my ears are orgasming. It's phenomenal. And that's still with the traditional SNES sound. And the only game I think that even came close to that was Final Fantasy VI.
On the SNES.
On the SNES, yeah.
At least, yeah.
Yeah, definitely don't play the Game Boy Advance version if you want good music like that game.
Yeah, I think Chrono Trigger stands up so much because, as you say, there hasn't really been another like really amazing time travel game. There hasn't been another game like Chrono Trigger that's done its concept better. That's why it's still so widely loved. Or I think is something like Romancing Saga 3, right? That got a re-release semi-recently. And I played that, and I had played it a very, very long time ago. But the problem is that Romancing Saga 3's concept, almost everything it does, is done better in The Alliance Alive. So like Romancing Saga is a classic. It's a classic, but the problem is that it's been overtaken now. So like at the time, it might have been cutting edge and amazing, but somebody going back and playing it now after they've already played like Legend of Legacy, which is essentially the same concept, but not as good as The Alliance Alive, and they've played Alliance Alive, they're going to be like, oh, this is like, or even Octopath Traveler, because there are elements of Romancing Saga 3 and Octopath. So they play those games and they go back to Romancing Saga 3 and they're like, okay, so this is kind of like those games, except way smaller and more confusing and not as fun.
I can agree with you, but
whereas like Chrono Trigger doesn't have that. You can't say like Chrono Trigger's ever been like superseded by a game that does the same stuff that it does.
But even just as a pure RPG, even if you take out the time travel elements, I enjoy new JRPGs, but in many cases is that this genre has actually made itself too complicated in many ways, in that it's actually making its system so convoluted that unless you have like years of experience with these games, they may often feel impenetrable and inaccessible. Good example of this, they're good games, but the Atelier games, I've tried to get into them multiple times. I want to, but then I just look at these menus and my brain just dies. I don't think I'm a stupid guy.
Just play Ryza.
It's like, what the fuck does all this mean? And the game barely like even attempts to give you an idea of what the hell you're doing and like what the most productive formula is and should you use this item or that item. It's so much to take in for like a newcomer, and the simplicity of this game at its core basis is one of its greatest strengths. There's you level up, you get new skills, you use the skills in the right place. That's literally it. And it's not complex, it's not deep, but it is strategical, and it's backed up by a beautifully visualized world, as you can see from this video, that just I feel has not been. I would like RPGs now to go back to this simpler, like, visual aesthetic. Can we have a few less waifus, please? And
oh. Are you crazy?
I think is that a jab at Xenoblade 2?
Yes, that is a jab at Xenoblade 2.
If there weren't waifus in JRPGs.
I think the genre would actually be more popular, if I'm being entirely honest. I think.
Well, that goes. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 skyrocketed the series to new heights. So
that is true, but that's because it's focusing on a very specific niche audience. And this is a conversation I've had with people who are like big fans of Final Fantasy in like the 90s and stuff and just fell off the genre. And part of the reason why they kind of fell off is because it became very clicky. It became very nichey, and like we need to get the panty shots with the girls and the shower scenes and the spa scenes and all that sort of thing. And it just kind of put people. And I'm not saying people can't enjoy that if they want to. That's totally their choice. But like from a Western perspective, that wouldn't be a popular.
I think what you're describing, though,
I feel like it distracts from the main important elements of the games, like the story, the characters, you're selling the game short by putting these kind of elements into it.
The reason why I disagree with that is because I play a lot of anime-based games, Tales, Xenoblade, and as an avid watcher of anime, like there's tropes that go into these games that give them the identity that they are. Chrono Trigger looks anime-ish, and in fact, I mean, you got Toriyama that did the art design, so it definitely has its basis in anime, but it was sprite-based. It never felt like playing an anime, and there are plenty of RPGs that don't feel like playing anime. But the ones that do have got to have those core things in them. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was vastly different from 1. And that's why I can like both of them in equal amounts, because they're both very different styles of games. There weren't those things you're talking about in 1, but there were plenty of them in 2.
I think this genre needs to go back to basics. That's what I think. They need to be like, let's create a world that has an interesting aesthetic, first and foremost, with a unique setup. Let's get people who can write unique music and someone who is a very creative character artist.
Sounds like you're talking about nothing but Monolith Soft right now to me. I'll be completely honest with you. I mean, that's what they've done.
Did you just say a lot of original artists? That sounds like you're talking about Xenoblade Chronicles 2.
No, but here's the I mean, get one original artist to design all the characters, but like I find a lot of characters nowadays are over designed. It's like, what the fuck is this person wearing?
Yeah.
Any of the Senno games, for instance, like can he just wear a pair of pants and a scarf? It's like Final Fantasy VII is one of the most famous RPGs of all time, and it actually is probably the most simplistic of Nomura's designs ever, because everybody isn't wearing belts on like every single piece of clothing. And I think that JRPGs could, I'm not saying they're bad right now, but I feel like they could renew themselves if they actually went back to the basics. And that's actually what I'm hoping Final Fantasy 16 does, that it's going to take a hint from Final Fantasy 14's book and just be like, here's a fantasy world, go enjoy it and have a fun adventure. Don't worry about the 10 progression systems you need to take in order to level up.
I don't think stories are ever going to get simple like that again. I think the closest you're ever going to see is like Octopath Traveler, where they don't try and over-explain anything. The JRPGs are stuck with you have to have a big complex story now. But as far as systems go, I think there could definitely be some simplifying going on. Like the way I look at Octopath Traveler, I really liked that game because it's immediately you start the game and you pick, say, the guy who's the scholar, right? And it just starts and it gives you like a very short intro, couple of lines, and then you just walk into a cave and you get into a fight, and it just turns out this scholar can do magic. There wasn't like an origin story for his combat abilities, or it was just that's it. And like people who have played lots of RPGs would be like, oh, of course, he's a scholar, he's a mage, that makes sense. But people who haven't played RPGs would still go into it and not be like, I really needed to know why he could do magic.
But you don't, for instance, you don't really question why her name's escaping me right at this moment, the techie lady built a time machine. You just kind of accept that she did.
Oh, look.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I do wish there was more simplifying like that, but I just don't think that that's the way they're going to go. They're always going to have these big complex stories now.
Now, words, Luca didn't build a time machine. She built a portal device, and it set off with the pendant.
Which turned out to be a time machine. It's like...
No, the pendant is what turned it into a dimensional rift time machine. No, the epoch is the time machine. That was built by one of the three sages. Oh, God. Anyway.
so like, I do want to like jump back to fan service though in games nowadays. I think the thing is that fan service is just more visually noticeable now because of technology. So like when people were saying, oh, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is full of it and it's never been in the series before, I mean, Xenoblade Chronicles 1 definitely not as fan servicey, but there are many moments that are almost exactly the same that you just wouldn't notice because of their crappy graphics. Like there are many shots of Melia like laying with her ass out at the campfire, and all of Fiora's outfits are obscene.
I think there's ways it can be
on.
tastefully done.
Well, so
see, that's the thing. There's difference between tasteful, like, because fan service people like, oh, panty shot or whatever, but sexuality in anime and JRPGs is quite often used as like a punchline or comedy, and I've become totally numb to that, where it's not an issue. Like, oh, okay, so the girl falls, you know, her skirt goes over the dude's head and they fall over. Ha ha. Like, I'm totally numb to that, but people see that and they're like, oh, this is so bad, horrible. But like, is it? It's like 1 second. It's just a joke, guys.
Well, that exact thing is in Suikoden 2, actually. So that's going back to 2000.
Really?
I think either 2000 or 2001. Okay, so there's a troop of performers. Not spoilery, because I still want you. You're going to have to play those games, Jay. Troop of performers. One of them goes up to a guard at one point because you're trying to get into an area, and she asks him about adult conversations. Okay, that's not the translation is obviously not great, but she's obviously offering him sex, and the screen goes black, and then your party moves on past because she's distracted him.
So you got to the end of the video, huh? Thank you for checking out today's discussion. If you enjoyed our guests or the subjects we were talking about, please consider checking the links down below. All the information will be there. You can find us on all the social medias and all the usual places under the name No Word Count. And if you really enjoyed the conversation, please do consider checking us out on Patreon and Twitch and helping to support the channel, because that will just help us to continue bringing you more great discussions with more great people. Take care of yourselves. Stay beautiful.